Hey Andy, how you doing?
All
Good to
right,
have you, man.
thanks. It's great to be here.
So here, Performance Talks, we're talking to people all in the industry, and really excited to have you on because I got like a ton of questions.
Hmm.
But I thought maybe like just kind of a first opener, especially since you're a web consultant, right? So you're kind of like a
Yeah.
hired gun. Um, how did you get into web performance? Like what was kind of the arc that ended us up with Andy?
Wow. So the arc starts a long time ago. The arc starts back in 1998 when I joined a UK startup that specialised in e-learning. And although we were only trying to deliver e-learning over intranets via our own custom Java player, so you couldn't really do it in HTML then, we had to worry about all the things about how much bandwidth people have, how does latency affect them, and we had three versions of each courses. We had a full video course, we had one that had audio and images synced up, and then we had like one with speech bubble captions, and we delivered different experiences based on how fast somebody's network connection was. And I worked for that company for about 4 years. We got bought by McGraw Hill, and then several years later we got shut down. But that's life. In the dot-com boom, bust it would be. And then I went away from it for a bit, and eventually I joined another educational publisher in the UK around 2007, and I was responsible for helping build an online learning platform we were using to deliver content to schools, and schools had 300 PCs, 16 meg ADSL line if they were lucky. So the amount of contention was huge. So we had to make both the content and the platform we were selling this service on performant. And Steve Souders started writing his books around that time. Pat Meenan was producing Page Test, the plugin for IE, and we worked on making this application faster and the content faster, and we had positive feedback from customers, and I was hooked.
It's so funny. I've done a bunch of these interviews now, and of course, it's kind of like once you get into a sector of computer science, I think, and you kind of specialize in that sector, you end up having just a lot of friends in that area,
Mm-hmm.
and like the arcs are surprisingly similar. Like there's always some limitation, like be it bandwidth or be it compute. Like I have a colleague who kind of grew up in kind of early, what was the Soviet Union, and had just incredibly limited CPU power.
Mm-hmm.
And like for me personally, growing up, kind of we did like some large scale portals at Appian and things like that. But then when I went to Wall Street, it was all latency. I mean, I mean, you literally had like one clock cycle, two clock
Mm-hmm.
cycles, three clock cycles to do something. So, so now you're out there kind of like helping companies and kind of stepping in. And, you know, one of the things that I think for me is the most frustrating is kind of this view, you'll kind of walk into a company and they'll say, "Oh, here's my lighthouse number."
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's just a tremendous amount of confusion between field data, real user metrics and lab
Yeah.
data, but synthetic data, and like which score matters the most. And I mean, can you just take some mystery out of it for everybody?
Oh, which
Um,
skill matters the most? What
or
matters the
like
most?
what's the difference? When is one valuable? When do you reach for one tool versus the other?
Business experience. So how does speed, because we're talking about performance, affect how people behave? Because fundamentally, I'm being hired to help somebody make their business more successful. So I am somebody who loves rum. I I spend far too long looking at how different segments of a customer's visitor base behave, what their experience is. So, you know, those people who are on iPhones who have a nice fast experience. Those people are on high-end Androids who have a pretty good experience too, and then we get worse and worse as we get into people with cheaper Android devices. So I spend a lot of time looking at what the environment those visitors are using. But the piece that really works for me is when you can relate that to how they behave and how that behavior relates to the success of a business. So the classic one is in e-commerce, do people with faster experiences spend more money, or are they more likely to convert? Because that's what retailers are more interested in. Or the bigger challenge is, how do we not just look at that in a transactional here and now situation, but how do we look at that in customer lifetime value terms? So rum is the thing I love, and it gives me a picture of what's going on for a whole visitor base for a site. But we don't always have it. And even when we do have it, there's limitations to how far it can take us. It can start to hint where we have a problem. It can start to hint that this class of Android device, these people have a poor experience. And what we get to then is why are they having a poor experience? And that's often when I'll start to dip into synthetic.
Yeah,
Sometimes
it's really kind of like the audit tool.
the thing that comes with Lighthouse and the thing that comes with PageSpeed Insights is they're easy for people to access. You can run it on any site, whether it's yours or your competitors. You
Right.
can. It's simplified, so you've got something easier to grapple with. You get a score. You know, people love scores. Whereas when you get into rum, you get into the noisiness and the messiness of the data and the fact, you know, you've almost got to buy a second analytics product on top of whether you're using GA or Adobe Analytics or whatever to capture this extra data. And we haven't sort of got them quite together in the rum world yet.
No customer cares as much about web performance as we do. And like, I want every single metric, and like every metric means something to me. And like I'm deep into every one of them. But you're right. It's the impacts that the customer cares about, right? Like what is the
Mm-hmm.
impact on conversion rate? How do you do that? What is the impact on, bounce rate? Or it's interesting you mentioned average order value. That was not an intuitive to me. That was not an intuitive relationship to speed.
Mm-hmm.
Although it is insanely correlated. So we've kind of seen, because we have the ability where we kind of try to tackle this, and I think we're moving in the right direction, but it's still, I think, a big open problem. When we accelerate a page, we'll emit a non-interaction event to Google Analytics,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can build a segment on that event, so you can
Yeah.
kind of set your accelerated and your non-accelerated users. And again, there's so many metrics that can
Yeah.
go into that calculation, which again, I think is kind of one of the things about our industry that is a bit frustrating to people from the outside, is that there are so many metrics, and they are
Mm-hmm.
all important. And I mean, this is a fun one, right? So like, imagine imagine you were in like a Liam Neeson scenario, right? Where you had to
Right.
like save the website. And I was like, okay, Andy, you can only bring five metrics with you. Like, you only have five metrics. Which five would you go through?
I'd cry first of all because I think I got five.
I know, but like, there's only five. There's,
There's only
and the
five.
clock's ticking.
Server response times are one of the metrics I find most interesting and most ignored. When Steve Sanders did his original research in his book, he came up with the 80-20 rule, I think it was, where 80% of the time is spent on the front end to start there. And Steve also said, but if your server takes longer than this, you should look at your server first. And it's quite interesting to look across data from sites, from customer sites, and you'll see landing pages often have really, really fast server responses. But as you dig into e-commerce sites, when you get to catalog pages where there's 32 products on a page, that's typically where I begin to see things be a less clean picture, and their server response times become slower, and then get down to the product page and they get fast again. And unless you can sort of separate it out by page, that middle bit can get lost where you get a catalog page that's slow. And until the browser's got the HTML, it's got nothing to do. So some of my biggest wins have been helping people fix their time to first byte issues. We also see things like a client last year before, I think we took half a second out of one SQL query for one catalog page. And the other thing we noticed is every other page got quicker because obviously their query has been queuing up behind this slow query.
Right.
So yeah, we made half a second gain across those catalog pages, their most busiest page, in an afternoon eventually. And that's a fantastic return. Everything got faster. So beyond how quickly the server responds, I then like to look at how soon visitors start to see content. And first, contentful paint is probably the metric I choose for that. Then we get into things like, from paint metric points of view, largest contentful paint. To steal one of the core web vitals, I don't always agree with what Core Web Vitals picks as the largest contentful paint. Sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it gets it wrong. So in e-commerce terms, sometimes it'll pick the heading for a product, sometimes it'll pick the image. And for me, one of the key things is that product image and how quickly does it display. Does it fit on the screen? There's a remarkable number of mobile e-commerce sites where you have to scroll to actually get a good view of the product. I think the worst I saw was a pendant lamp, and you could see the wire going down to the lamp, and the actual picture of the pendant itself was off the bottom of the screen. So, so sometimes I use custom metrics to help measure those hero times and those product images that aren't completely covered by largest contentful paint. Then once we've got the main content on the screen, it's how quickly can somebody interact with it? How quickly can they click? Can they scroll? Can they add it to their basket? And first input delay is really trying to pick that up. You said 5, and I've done 5 because I've included custom metrics.
You're a first input delayer versus a time to interactiver, because I'm a TTI guy. I understand the concept of first input delay. I just have fundamental issues with it.
The one is, when could they actually interact with it for the first time?
Right.
It's knowing when somebody's trying to interact with it versus when they could. I think is
right.
That's a hard thing to split. And
this is probably why we end up with so many metrics, right? Because it's like, if they can't actually interact with it, you might not even have FID metrics, right? Because it just might give up. It's interesting about the server timing. And especially on a per page level, because you tend to think of server timing as origin specific, but it's definitely not.
Yeah.
If the server takes 2 seconds to get you the first HTML, all is lost. Like there's no recovering from that. So, kind of one of the things that I think is an interesting thing to look at, and kind of you jumping into companies, it would be interesting to hear. I view web performance by and large as like the web performance allocation should really come from marketing as compared to like IT. Now I understand that there are times when we need to work in infrastructure bits, but like the actual value propositions that making the site faster, unless that's your core business, if you're like a web based company, and then of course it's the whole thing, but like the actual core value propositions that get delivered from a faster page load are like better conversion rate, lower bounce rate. I mean, effectively more efficient spending of marketing capital, right? Because if
Mm-hmm.
you take $10 million and go buy ads, and you've got a 75% page abandonment rate, I mean, you just took $7.5 million and set it on fire. Like, you might as well just like taken, you know, you might as well had some fun with it because you didn't get any value out of it.
Mm-hmm. So most of the time, I'm dealing with somebody from a business ownership point of view. So it might be a marketing director, it might be an e-commerce director. It's somebody who has profit responsibility for the site, um, business responsibility for the site, and they are without a doubt. So the e-commerce people are always looking for how can we make more money, how can we make our ad spend more effective. I'll talk about publishers in a minute as well. From a marketing point of view, it's how do we expand our reach. The latest thing, of course, is they're all worried about how are they going to rank come the May update to Google's search ranking algorithms. But it's all about how do they expand their reach, how do they make more money. From a publishing point of view, it's how do I get my ads so they're viewable more quickly. But there are most of my customers, there is a business driver behind them. But alongside that, depends on the size of the customer, how involved IT is. So in some cases, their development team and their infrastructure team are in-house. In other cases, it's a bought-in service or they're using an agency, and those relationships get longer and a bit more complicated.
When these two sides are working together, and again, it's really keeps coming to me back on like the marketing spend, because
Mm-hmm.
marketing's spending tons and tons and tons of money, and in IT we're always fighting for budget.
Mm-hmm.
But when you can do something like, hey, and I think this kind of gets back to your core point of like choose metrics, but like ultimately it's about the business metrics. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you can come back and be like, listen, session length has gone up, conversion rate has gone up, page abandonment has gone down, bail ratio has gone down, and that is all translated to you spent the same dollar you spent last month, except we got 57 cents of value out of it,
Mm-hmm.
instead of 12 cents.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, we saved $5 million, $6 million, $7 million. And the infrastructure argument one is interesting. I mean, uh, we're almost our entire focus is on client side caching. So kind of
Mm-hmm.
using the service worker to create a cache inside the browser and add things like predictive pre-caching and things like that. And it never ceases to amaze me how often we'll see especially third party tags, that will have, you know, either no cache control header, which just shatters my mind every time I see it, or like a cache control header that's nothing. And it's like, man, that is costing you so much money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do think third party tags get a lot of blame, and probably rightly so. Um, but I mean, when you're going into a site and kind of looking at infrastructure, are you seeing the same kind of gains on origin?
Quite a lot of stuff that can be done on Origin, just from doing things like switching all your product images to use either switch to a CDN that does image optimization, make the problem go away, um, or switch to one of the companies that specializes in hosting images. And your customers get a better experience, and often the costs balance up. Um, then the other third parties, so marketing tags, adverts, customer success, on all those sorts of things, I think there's two sides to it. I think third party tags get a bad reputation, and in some ways, many of them deserve it. And I think the really interesting thing is if some of them, it wouldn't take so much for some of them to get better, and they would also become more profitable services. There's one I dealt with last year, a review service, who ship 200 and, no, yeah, 250k of base 64 encoded uncachable fonts to every visitor on every site that uses their product, on every page, I think it is. So it's a massive amount of data they're shoveling around, and if they were a bit better, they could slash their bandwidth bills. So those never cease to amaze me. But coming back to the customer and the things we've got control over, what I try to encourage customers to do when it comes to third parties is, one, make choices. Understand what the cost of the third party they're using is from a speed point of view. What's its performance impact?
So kind of like the thing that we see kind of over and over again is somebody, customers will take all the third parties and kind of get introduced to Google Tag Manager, shove
Mm-hmm.
everything into after the onload event.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you've got just this rat's nest of complexity that needs to run after the page load that,
Mm-hmm.
again, a lot of this stuff is just huge wads of JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff's got to be, it's got to be parsed, it's got to get JIT compiled, it's got to get run on CPU. Like we very few of these things tend to use things like web workers, so they're all fighting kind of contentiously on the CPU to get access. And then what we end up seeing is like on a navigation event, kind of, as a user wants to navigate off that page, we'll actually get these kind of stalls,
Mm-hmm.
because there's just so much essentially junk in the trunk at the end of the page. Like, so they gotta like the actual unload event can go sideways.
There are common events, so like we made a sale, fire that out to everybody. And then there are the uncommon events that end up in page hide or on before unload, where people want to take all the resource timing data, chunk it up, and push it back out. And several years ago, when I worked with Simon Hearn, we found a third party run product that was taking 2 seconds to chunk up the resource timing data, compress it, and send it back. And it was a real problem for their Android visitors. So it's either, how do we get it out of that step, I think is the question.
I mean, man, you hit like my pet peeve is tools that are designed to help you analyze your site. Either, heat maps are the absolute worst, but like I've seen all these boomerang implementations where it's like, why is this CPU going for a walk for 600 milliseconds? Like, what are you doing? Like, what is going on down there? And then like you look and it's like, oh, well, I'm taking this giant run string and compressing it so it's more efficient. And it's like, well, while you're getting more efficient, my phone's gonna catch on fire. And it's like there is a bit of like the Heisenberg problem, right? Where it's like if you want to measure it, you got to minimize the impact.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we definitely kind of err on the side of no impact. So like if we have to grab it super quick, and then we're using the service worker to send the data. And
Mm-hmm.
like if we kind of can't do that, I mean, we will try to use the beacon as well, but like we're more than happy to be like, you know what, this page is not in a great place. I don't need to actually capture this data. I need to render this page, and then maybe later we can send the data. One of the things that we're working on now that we've been working on for a long time, and this might be the thing that actually drives me insane, and I may not make it out of this product build, is automated root cause analysis. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
can we do it? And I think, I don't think that we can get 100% there, but I think that we can make some meaningful steps. One of the things, I was just looking at was when you take these alerts. So you're talking about the server timing. So building alerting on server timing is pretty trivial, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like we're gonna essentially figure out, 3 standard defs of where this thing's going to be, and then like if we trip that, we're going to do something. Um, the problem that I've seen a lot is it's like you'll kind of just get a graph, and it's like okay, thank you, uh, very nice. I see it's messed up. What else do you have for me? So like, what you really want to do is you want to go grab that level one run data and navigation timing and the resource level timing. I mean, if it's server timing, you just need nav, but and send that raw data out. I mean, do you think we can get there? Do you think that we could? Do we have enough metrics, and have we worked on this long enough to start to build towards automated RCA?
I think there are quite a few. I believe we can get to better automated root cause analysis or automated cause analysis. Not may not get to the root for the more for some classes of problems. And
That's actually a good
there are
point.
there are people, other people believe that. So I haven't seen anybody from Airbnb for a while, but they were working on Lighthouse in the browser at one point, which is a similar sort of, you know, these are the issues your real world customers are having, go solve them. And there are some classic things I think we can pick up. One of my biggest bugbears is CSS import, where you import a CSS file from within another CSS file. Sorry, you import one style sheet from within another style sheet, and the page is essentially blocked until that second style sheet is downloaded. But the browser doesn't discover it needs that second style sheet until it's parsing the first one. So you can pick it up in RUM data by looking at initiators. You can look at this CSS file's fetch was initiated by another CSS file. You can pick up those sorts of problems. So we have that.
I mean, this is definitely something that I want to solve, or at least move the ball forward on. I think one thing that we need to do is build a place where these rules can all kind of live and be tested against real data. Um, and make these rules open is the other thing. I mean, there's no reason why like, you know, if it's true for me, it's true for you. Like,
Yep.
if you can use the long task API to go identify, something, then like that's true everywhere. So, I mean, that's definitely something that we want to work on at over the course of this year and next year. Ultimately, that's all most people want is like, hey, they just want Andy in a box, man. That's it. That's all they want. I want Andy in a box. I want automated Andy. That's all I want.
Sometimes
Well,
they
listen,
might not
man. I
want.
know I took. No, I always want Andy in a box. Actually, the CSS thing with the initiators, that's brilliant. I'm absolutely gonna do that today. I'm
I'm
gonna go
writing a
take a
Lighthouse
look.
plugin for it at the moment.
That's super clever. I mean, and
Yeah.
again, it's like you kind of only learn these things from like going out on tours of duty and like again, like that unload event, which is a metric that I never paid attention to. And it turns out that like it's not very valuable in and of itself, but that combined with the refer is incredibly valuable because you're able to be like, hey, why is it when this refer is here, this unload event metric is here? It's like it's not actually the page, it's the page before.
One of my clients at the moment has a problem with their A/B testing script gets too big, and their A/B testing script uses an anti-flicker snippet, so it hides the page. But by default, there's no way of capturing milestones on what happens when the anti-flicker snippet starts, when it finishes, when the third-party snippet finishes do its work. So we've worked around it with mutation observers, and I'd like to see some standard patterns from third parties that tell us when their milestones are happening, so we can capture that data and get a better understanding of what's going on too.
That's a good one. It's going on the board, Andy. We can add that in the Edgemesh. We should add that into our own stuff. So, like for example, like when a worker comes up and um, when you do the cache thing, that would be great. Um, well, listen, I took a ton of time. I could do this for like another hour, but I know that you have clients to go see. So,
Cool.
thanks for the time, man. And listen, I know your
Pleasure.
dance card is pretty full, but
Hmm.
if clients want to engage with you, what is the best way for them to do that? And I think more importantly, kind of what kind of scale does a client need to be at before they kind of reach out to you?
I will help people size and engagement to suit their budget and suit their need and to
Awesome.
suit what gain we can make for them as a business. And the two best ways of getting hold of me are Twitter, where I'm Andy Davies, nice and easy to remember, and then email is hello@andydavies.me, and that'll end up in my inbox, and then we can discuss how I can help them or who may be better to help them from there. And I have customers in the UK, the US, other side of the world, in Australia and New Zealand. So I'm used to working remotely with a wide range of clients across time zones. So I'm sure we can make it work.